Thank you, Katie. Nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, no problem. And before we just started, I was just telling you, like, you're such an inspiration to the dystonia community because, you know, you were one of the first people to really bring it to the forefront. And when at a time when no one knew what this was or even believed, you know, that it was a real thing, and you were so open and public about it. And not only that, but just being as highly acclaimed as you are, along with, you know, Leon Flesher and Gary Graffman, just being able to talk about this up front, it really kind of opened the door to this. And I feel like for a lot of us musicians who, you know, even back in 2011, when I got diagnosed, when I looked on the internet for any type of information on it, it always led me to you or Leon. It was just one of those things where it wasn't talked about. And so I just have a lot of respect for you.
Thank you.
I'm going to go ahead and introduce you for any of the brass players that were double reed players, especially out there that might not know your background. So David is the co-chairman of the guitar studies at Manhattan School of Music. And he's also won several awards as well as done several tours. I can't even name them all. Has had several grants given to him. He also taught at New England Conservatory before he's at Manhattan School of Music for probably like 22 years or something.
Yeah, 22, 23, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, really long time. And he's also artistic director of one of the events in New York. What is it called? Guitar Plus?
Guitar Plus, yep.
Yeah, annual series.
Chamber music.
And he's also just a couple years ago published a guitar method book, which is really great. I really suggest you guys purchase it.
It's not, sorry to interrupt you, but it's not a guitar method book at all. It's not, it's not that. Well, let me just describe it while I'm interrupting you.
Yeah, no problem, no problem.
It's a book published by Oxford University Press called Playing with Ease. And the subtitle is A Healthy Approach to Guitar Technique. But the book is actually very much directed to all instrumentalists, really. It is guitar specific in 2 of the 7 chapters, but much of the book is really very much geared towards all instrumentalists because it's about an ergonomic understanding of how to play your instrument. And it does contain one very important chapter on my ideas about engaging large muscles, which the focal dystonia sufferers will want to look at because it is about that. It's my information is gleaned from my own experience.
And that's really amazing. I really do think it's a very special thing, and just you know, just bringing new ideas to the forefront about like how we teach things, and just basically how we can make things more efficient and easier to play with less tension. And it's a really amazing book. I actually just bought it like last week and started reading it, and like I was telling you in the email, that it really relates to a lot of what I've done to rehabilitate with my embouchure. And I know that's a weird thing to talk about. We'll talk about that a little bit later if we can. But for now, I really want to focus on, you know, guitar specific stuff. So I have a bunch of people just chiming in right now saying hi. I'm just checking on this. We have, I can't say his name, Wim van Mol. He said he's from Brussels, and so I know he's really trying hard to attend this, and we've been keeping track of time and everything. So welcome, Wim. And then can you just kind of walk us through what really got you into guitar playing? Like what made you really passionate about it and take that leap of faith into, I really want to do this for a living. This is something that I'm really passionate about.
It's funny, you know, the guitar, it wasn't sort of one of those typical guitarist stories where I heard Segovia or Julian Bream or somebody and thought, oh, that's the sound I want to make. It was after I was 10 years old. I had started when I was 9 years old on the violin, and I was just awful. I really sucked at the violin. Playing Mary Had a Little Lamb and just sounding like the worst. It was the most awful sound. So I stopped doing that after, I don't know, maybe half a year. And then my mother and I sort of discussed, well, what other instrument, because I knew I wanted to play something else, but I didn't know what. And so we gravitated to the guitar, mostly because it was an affordable instrument. You know, we were not wealthy people, and we knew that we could rent a guitar for a very low amount, and your rent would go on the way to buying the guitar. So that's what we did, and I started with folk guitar lessons, and I didn't really begin classical much until 3 years later when I was 13, and then I really
Oh, wow.
was sort of dabbling for a long time and didn't really get to delving into being a classical player until I was 17 years old.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, I was a very late bloomer, late starter. But I made up for it. I progressed extremely quickly, and for about 4.5 years after that, I was in the first international guitar competition in North America in Toronto, and tied for second prize in that competition. So
Oh my
it was
goodness.
a very rapid ascent, and I always had known I was going to be a musician, but I didn't know exactly what. By this time, I knew I was headed to being a guitarist and a composer, which had accompanied me all along as
Yeah,
well.
and with your composing, you've really brought new works into the guitar repertoire, which I know, with classical music, not just with guitar playing, but even, in orchestra and with all the brass instruments and stuff, we kind of rely on the older works, so much because they're classics, but it's really nice to see new works, and especially written for our instrument by the actual instrumentalist that plays it. So that's really great that you've been able to do that.
Thank you. Well, and I do make a point of writing instrument for other instruments other than the guitar. I've written 3 orchestra pieces and a lot of chamber music. Written a brass quintet, in fact.
Oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to get it.
So yeah,
Oh, that's awesome.
yeah.
And so, yeah, you were really just catapulted into, you know, this new kind of, spotlight and everything. Was that kind of hard to transition into, or were you just kind of like, I'm just gonna go with the flow and see what happens?
It was exciting. It
Yeah.
was exciting. Yeah.
And then you went on to study guitar then at college, and after that,
Not much, actually. No, I never studied guitar in college. I'm
oh,
mostly a self-taught player and composer, actually.
oh
Um,
wow,
yeah,
okay.
the longest I ever studied with any one person was John Duart in England. I studied for 9 months with him on my year off from college. The second longest was with David Starobin for 6 weeks at a summer festival. Other than that, my training was really with mostly non-guitarists, violists and pianists. Um, and it's not that I would ever recommend this to anybody else, but it just happened to be my way of doing things, just what I gravitated to.
Yeah, and I do remember you wrote in your book that in a way this being self-taught has given you this ability to think your way kind of around things in a different way, because sometimes when you get stuck, like a lot of us, we go to college and we get stuck with one professor for the 4 years that we're with them, the short amount of time, and we really rely on every single word that they say, and we get kind of stuck in this, this is the way or the highway, and
Yeah,
we don't really have our, sometimes, not all of us, but sometimes we get really stuck in relying on that. So it's really nice that you were able to, I feel like musicians who are more self-taught, and I'm not saying this for everyone, but I feel like definitely, have a lot more creativity in their own playing, if that makes sense.
yeah,
Yeah.
it does make sense. You kind of
Um,
that self-reliance is something that you take with you into so many aspects of your life, and again, for better or for worse. Who knows whether that contributed to my injury with focal dystonia? I don't know. I actually don't think it did, but it's possible that it did. One never knows.
Yeah, it's interesting that you said that you were late starter, because I was a late starter on French horn, actually. I didn't start studying horn until I was 15. And before that, like I told you, I was just learning guitar, but I was very self-taught, because I took piano lessons when I was 5 years old, and I studied that until like maybe 5th grade. And then once I hit 5th grade, I really got into guitar playing, but it was just self-taught stuff, and then After that, I got into horn when I turned 15, and that was it. But yeah, I completely understand.
Hmm.
I'm just gonna go ahead and let me see. I'm just gonna check my notes here really quick. You developed focal dystonia in your right hand, correct? In your ring and pinky finger in 1984.
That's correct.
At the time, what was kind of going on in your life? When did you first start kind of noticing the symptoms, and what were your thoughts around it?
Early in that year, 1984, I noticed that I had a little bit of lessening of speed. I was playing an unbelievably difficult bunch of repertoire. I was playing in not every program, but most of my programs. I was playing the 12 Villalobos etudes, the Bach Chaconne, Philip Glass, fourth knee play from Einstein on the Beach. And I think that wasn't that sometimes was the program, and sometimes those pieces would cycle in and out of the program. But I was playing an unusual, and the Ginastera Sonata also, which had just come out and was one of the most difficult pieces yet written. And these pieces were an immense challenge. And knowing what I know now, I should never, ever have played all these pieces at the same time. They were way, way, way too hard. So anyway, what I was noticing was a lessening of speed in the early part of the year. And then as the season wound down and the summer was less busy, I started to investigate what was going on. I knew something was wrong, but it wasn't terrible, but it was significant. And I'd play my guitar kind of hanging my head down, you know, watching what I was doing. And I'm sure that made things worse. Anyway, I was watching my right hand for every little tiny nuance of detail. And the more that I watched in this way, the worse that it got. The fall came around. I had a concert early in the fall. I think it was September or October in Portland, Oregon. And I went and played the concert. I was nervous about it because my playing was deteriorating, but still okay. The second half of the concert was the 12 Villalobos etudes. And as I began the etudes, my ring finger started failing me, and I just suddenly had to switch to my thumb, index, mostly thumb and index, actually. And I just on the spot refingered all 12 etudes. Ironically, people came up to me after the concert and said they loved the concert, what a great concert it was. And I was practically in tears because I knew that I couldn't go on this way. And, you know.
Oh my goodness.
At
This
that
is
point,
rough. I feel like at the beginning stages, you know, it creeps in, and it's a very sluggish feeling. And other people will hear it, but then, you know, you feel it, you just know something's wrong, something's off.
oh, it was so, so wrong. And I just then started canceling concerts one by one, not knowing what I was doing or what was happening. You know, as you said before, people really didn't quite know what this was. Leon Fleischer and Gary Grafman had long before been diagnosed with this, and I guess it had a name, but most people like me had no idea what the name was or whether this was a real condition that was common or what, you know, we just didn't know.
Yeah, I was
So
gonna ask you what you when you were trying to figure out what was going on. Did you reach out to anyone, or did you talk to someone that you knew, and did it take a while to figure out what it was and then get a diagnosis? Or
oh yeah, well, I went to many different people right away. I started with a chiropractor who did me no good. Then I over the years, I think over 5 years, I went to many different practitioners. I tended to trust the Eastern practitioners more than the Western. So I went for acupuncture early on. I went for clinical kinesiology, which is sort of a Western practice, but based on Eastern ideas. Um, I did go to one or two Western people. I went to somebody who did biofeedback. I went to a myotherapist, famous lady in Washington, not Nancy Bill, excuse me, Nancy Shaw in Washington, who had also treated Leon Fleischer. And, you know, all of them were unsuccessful in treating me. All of them said they would help me. So I got my hopes up each time. And every time my hopes were dashed to the ground. Finally, I went to another Eastern guy who was sort of an eclectic practitioner he called his therapy Hoshino therapy, named after a Japanese gentleman. And it was largely a Rolfing technique, which Leon Fleischer found, excuse me, to be very helpful. But this was actually the only treatment that did me damage. My condition got worse.
Oh no.
So at that point, I stopped going to other people to try and fix it. And I just thought, okay, I'm either going to fix this myself or maybe time itself will take care of it. I didn't know. So I stopped going to other people. For a while, I did nothing. At some point, I started playing with my thumb and index fingers just to be able to play again, and found myself being able, surprisingly, to play some very impressive repertoire and still sound halfway decent. And it wasn't until about a year after that, that was in 1992, this was 8 years after I had the first onset of dystonia. In 92, one of my colleagues at the New England Conservatory, Neil Anderson, was teaching a master class. I was observing it, and he was telling the student to swing his arm very in gross motions, you know, sort of like this, swing the arm towards the string and pluck that way. And I think Neil was just at the beginning of an interesting idea and was kind of experimenting with the students. And the more I saw this, the more I thought, oh, this may have something to do with me. And I went home and I started swinging that arm in the same kind of way. And within a few minutes, I was suddenly able to engage my ring finger, which I hadn't been able to use for 8 years at that point.
Wow.
It was
Oh my gosh, that's
incredibly
amazing.
incredibly emotional moment.
I had a quick question that came in from, and I can't pronounce his name. I'm so terrible at pronouncing names, by the way. It's spelled Kjell, Gel, Eric. And he's a guitar player that has focal dystonia, and he wanted to ask you, he said, I noticed several guitarists have a weird feeling in the dystonic fingers and a little loss of sensation. Did you experience a loss of tactile sensory too?
No, I did not. I did not. In fact, I've seen an enormous number of people with focal dystonia, and I have actually not come across that. Interestingly, doesn't mean it's nothing, but I suspect that whatever that is something else that is compounding the focal dystonia. In other words, when there's a numbness, there's usually something going on in the neck or the upper back, that some nerve is being compressed or something's out of alignment. That's once in a while it's caused from the elbow, something in the elbow. But these are basically nerve kinds of situations, and they, as far as I know, have nothing to do with focal dystonia. So it probably is something additional to the focal dystonia.
Okay, thank you for answering that.
Sure.
So Jill, I hope you heard that, and let us know in the comments if you got that as well on your end. And then, sorry to interrupt you, just
That's
going
fine.
back to what you're talking about with the, you were able to you start using your ring finger again in your playing, and this was a really significant thing for you. And so where did you go from there then? Did you just kind of start experimenting with
Yes.
different movements?
Yes, I mean, I took that kernel of an idea, and that's really all it was. And ironically, by the way, Neil shortly afterwards stopped teaching the guitar, went into the finance business. He actually found a way to make money, but
Wow.
I had sort of taken the ball that he handed me and ran with it, and you just used my intuition, followed my intuition, which in general had been very, very good up until then. I think I should also say that while none of the medical people or practitioners that I saw before trying to fix me were able to fix me, I did play for almost all of them, and they all said that my technique was anatomically perfect. So in a way, it was kind of ironic that that this had happened to me, and I knew that my instinct was basically good because my self-taught career had brought me to an anatomically perfect way of playing the guitar. So now I just had to figure out what the missing piece of the puzzle was. And it took me 4 years of experimenting, just following my instinct, and slowly and very gradually, I began to, um, well, I should say that the pulling in of the middle finger, which was also sometimes happening, started to go away after about a year. And then after another year, the secondary finger that was involved, which was the pinky, it stopped curling in. And finally, after 3 years, the ring finger started to pull in less. And after 4 years, I was 100% cured.
Wow. And did you use any type of like I remember I think I was reading an article or something like you had mentioned body mapping or Alexander technique, but I wasn't sure.
Alexander technique came much later, actually. Alexander technique came around, I was cured in 1996. In a few years later, 1998 or 9 or 2000, I think just before 2000, I started having very severe back troubles, really debilitating back troubles. And I went to Alexander technique teachers to see if they could fix it, and they did actually. Then it
Wow.
came back after a couple of years, and then I went back to Alexander, finally fixed everything. So I've had a lot of Alexander training, which had nothing to do with my cure, but did give me a lot of information in general about playing the guitar and playing instruments in general. And that's partly where part of one of the sources of my book, Playing with Ease, is those many lessons from Alexander technique teachers, and also a very little bit of Feldenkrais training as well.
Oh, that's really awesome. And you know, I think that's really great because even though you learned it after you had recovered, I really do think it's a great thing because as far as possible ways of prevention of injuries, not just dystonia, but just injuries in general, are these kind of body awareness methods or some semantics.
Well,
And
there are in fact a number of people who have cured themselves or cured other people with Alexander technique or body mapping techniques. So I think it does have something to offer. The particular people that I saw, I don't think would have been able to cure me of the focal dystonia, but I think that, as again, I've seen from other people, in the meantime, other people have had some success with Alexander techniques. So that may or may not have something to do with curing focal dystonia.
yeah, I definitely feel it's important though to have more body awareness in general as musicians, and something that we don't really learn until later or too late, or something that isn't offered at a lot of schools. It's been popping up a lot more, which is really great.
Yes.
But a lot of people don't know, even a lot of people know Alexander technique, but even just Feldenkrais or Rolfing or any area like that, they're kind of like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And you said a really interesting quote I wrote down from a interview you did with Guitar Magazine a while ago. And I like this quote because it kind of pinpoints, you know, why I think this body awareness is important. You said, this is in fact a 20th century problem that has to do with larger concert halls, more pressure to play faster, louder, more often, more difficult repertoire. And what we are beginning to find out is that the technique that instrumentalists in general have developed is not up to those tasks. We kind of get stuck in this mentality of no pain, no gain. And so I think that's really great that you've been able to write more about how you've been able to not just recover, but just play from a more healthy approach. And I think that I hope that future generations kind of look into this more often and think, how can we develop more healthy playing approach than, you know, stuck in this old mindset. So like brass players, we are really far behind because we have a method book, or not a method book, but what we call the Horn Bible, which is by Philip Farkas, and he basically describes how the embouchure should look and how it should function when you're playing. And if it doesn't look that way, doesn't function that way, then you must be doing something wrong. But you know, it's one of those things where it's like, you know, it's much healthier to look at playing from a movement perspective than this is the way it should look. It should be more like, this is the way it should feel. This is the way it
should.
Yeah.
Yes, that is the premise of my book. It's what's absolutely what my book is about. I think it's very important to understand movement as an abstract thing and understand how the body works best in order to make movement possible. How joints, for example, function. What's their optimum situation for functioning? What is the importance of alignment, and so on and so forth. And this sort of basic abstract understanding of how bodies work is, I think, where we need to begin, because those are just the basic premises of the body. And in order to play any instrument, you've got to use your body to play that instrument. So you've got to partner intelligently with your body to figure out how to do that. So if you're armed with good knowledge and information about how the body works and works best, then you can not only learn other people's technical ideas, but you can develop your own based on this basic knowledge. And that's, I feel very strongly about this. I as a teacher, I don't want to just give the information to my students. I want to empower them so that they can take the basic information and develop their own ideas from there.
It's really fantastic. I was just going to ask how you've kind of applied this to teaching, and I know a lot of people with dystonia, they say this has made me such a better teacher. Like I've been able to see, you know, when a student is how to help them out in tricky areas where, you know, like in the past when I looked at other horn players that were having struggles playing, you know, it was difficult for me to understand because it had always been an easy thing for me to do. And now that I had to kind of take a step back and look at what I was actually doing and see it from that perspective, as far as having troubles and having to work through this, it's made me a better teacher. Do you feel the same way too?
I think there are two basic essentials of being a good teacher in general, and specifically for teaching people so that they don't get injured. One of them is observation. You need to observe yourself and other people, how they play, what works, what doesn't work, and really observe closely. And the more you observe, the better you get at it. I mean, I feel like I have developed a kind of almost a sixth sense of observation skills, where I look at somebody and it's almost like x-raying them when I'm watching them play, because I see things that are going on in the shoulder, the neck, the mouth, whatever, even down to the pelvis, you know, all kinds of parts of the body that you might not even have thought were connected to playing your instrument. And I, I really am only good at that. I mean, yes, partly I have, I think, a good basic instinct, but mostly it's been developed over time simply by observing both myself and other people when they're playing. So observation is one of these basic things. The other basic thing is being able to articulate what you really mean or what you're feeling. In those years when I had focal dystonia and was not able to play, I continued to teach. So during those years, I honed down my ability to articulate what I was wanting to convey to the students. And I realized the immense number of inaccuracies or imprecision of how I was describing what I was describing to my students. And so again, over time with practice, I got better and better, trial and error, you know, just seeing again what works and what doesn't work. When I say such and such, does that work? When I say something else, does that work? And so you hone down the ability to articulate, just as you hone down the ability to observe. And those two together make the foundation of a really good teacher.
I think that's really amazing that you said that. I mean, I wish I could hear that more often, because I really do think that articulating things accurately is very important. In brass playing, we have, I can't tell you how many teachers I've had. Like I was telling you, for a lot of those people out there that are watching, I know you don't know me. So I'll just give a brief little tiny tidbit about me. I was telling David how I was a non-traditional student throughout college. So I started college in 2002. I was kind of on and off because I moved all over the place and I wasn't financially, you know, I couldn't afford college all the time. So I was like in the Midwest for a while, and then I was in Colorado. So I actually ended up going to 3 different universities throughout my undergrad, and having 5 different horn professors, as well as doing several master classes with really famous horn players. And I was always in a principal horn position throughout it. And what I loved was observing all the different ways that my horn professors had taught me, because it made me really passionate about wanting to go into teaching and be a horn professor, because I thought, wow, no one ever talks about how we can see things from different perspectives, and that we don't have to be stuck in this one way of thinking. But the articulating thing is really important, because I can't tell you how many teachers I've been stuck with, or even just professional musicians that have given me master classes, and they say things like, just use more air, or just blow out of the instrument, just get it out there. So it's just like, well, what do you mean by just use more air? Like, for a lot of students can take that into different, it gives them the ability to try to think their way through it and think, well, okay, that means I'm gonna, you know, force it out, instead of like think about like, how can I do this efficiently and safely and not in a way that's causing more tension. So if you hear someone say just use more air, just blow it out, we get really tense and we bring our shoulders up and we start breathing kind of, you know, strictly. And so we really need to articulate what exactly we mean when we're telling students what we want them to do. And this
it's everything. In fact,
yeah.
that detail is everything. It's the first thing I think I said in my book is, you know, you can't just say to somebody, relax. You have to tell them how to relax specifically, and that, you know, that's the whole book. You know, there are many details, so much nuance that goes into it. It's funny, you're talking about what you said about breathing air, reminded me of one of the ways that I learn. You know, when I teach master classes, I learn too. I was teaching a master class at McGill University a few years ago, and the person there who was organizing it was a great oboist, Jackie LeClaire, who, you know, she was listening in, sitting in on some of my classes, and I was working with somebody. I think it was, not sure if it was a wind player or a bowed string player, but anyway, I was working with someone and talking to them about the importance of breathing. And I used the analogy that I had heard from many voice teachers over the years about, think about expanding the barrel around you, all around you. And I used that terminology, and she said, "Excuse me, David," but she said, "Barrels don't expand." I said, "Oh my God, you're right. I never thought about it." And then she said, "Think of it like a balloon." And, oh yeah, that's it. So now I use that way of expressing it, and that's how you learn. You learn from other people correcting you, or you correct yourself. It's trial and error.
Yeah, it definitely is. I have a quick question that came in from Brian McAnally, and he says, "Hello, I'm a double bass player, and I'm a huge fan of your book, David. It has helped me very much with my left hand focal dystonia issues. So thanks so much. And I have a question. During the years of your retraining and learning to use the big muscles to cure yourself, how much, if any, mental practice or visualizations did you incorporate, and what exactly did you do mentally?" That's a very big question.
It's a wonderful question, and thank you, Brian, for telling me that. It's so nice to hear that the book has helped you. I'm really, really pleased. Visualization is, yes, very important, but maybe not as important as you might think. I think, for instance, I talk in the book particularly about not your issues, but right-hand issues for guitarists or pianists, thinking about visualizing the large muscles as being up in the armpit, in the center of the armpit, and visualizing that area does help, but it's definitely not essential to getting it better. The important thing is really engaging those large muscles and feeling that engagement. So more than visualization, what's really important is the feeling. So hopefully I've conveyed to you in the book what the feeling should be in your left hand as you work at the bass. I'm trying to think, was there a second part to that question? Visualization and something else?
Let me see here. He said mental practice visualization. Did you incorporate? What exactly did you do mentally? I don't know if that's the same thing.
Yeah, mental practice. No, again, I think probably mental practice might have almost nothing to do with it, surprisingly. It really, it's a hands-on thing. You've got to do it. And I've said this also about any injury whatsoever, whether it's a painless injury like focal dystonia or a painful injury like tendonitis or inflamed whatever, many different kinds of other injuries. The best way to cure those things is to maybe stop playing for a very brief amount of time and then figure out what went wrong, what was the incorrect thing that you were doing, correct it, and reinforce it over and over again correctly. So the solution is in the doing of it correctly. And the mental practice will not really help you all that much. You have to do it to make it better. Do it correctly.
Yeah, that's definitely, I definitely agree with you there. It's yeah, trying to, and for brass players, I use, like I tell people, sometimes I use visualizations, but it's not like a hugely important thing to focus on. Like for me,
Well, you know, for embouchure dystonia, that's the one thing I just have no clue how to fix. None, none. And
it,
for embouchure dystonia, it may very well have a lot to do with visualization. That I cannot speak to because that
yeah,
has completely stumped me.
yeah, but I feel like a lot of things are similar when I was reading your book are similar to things that I have done to help myself regain abilities. I've been able to regain, and I describe it by percentages. So I feel like I'm at 70% recovery. There's
Wow.
a percentage there that I don't feel recovered because I still am dealing with relieving tension over time because I have a lot of tension in my jaw that I'm
Mm.
constantly having to learn how to address. But the visualization, like in the beginning I had to use it a lot because I had to trick my brain, do kind of a sensory trick and trick my brain into thinking that I was doing something else besides playing the horn. So I would do like pretend like I was blowing on coffee or, blowing on some hot food just so I could also do a different muscle movement than what I'm used to doing. Because usually when we go to blow out, even as a brass player, if we have the instrument away from us, if someone said, Katie, just blow air out of your mouth right now, I would automatically set my face like I was playing the horn. I'd be like,
Oh, wow.
and instead of just doing a relaxed like,
There you go.
and so I started thinking, what can I do? What muscles can I use that I haven't been really aware of or using in my playing ever? Because in brass playing, we get so stuck in training our this one setup, and we think about our playing being just right here. And I had to kind of focus on
No,
more of the muscle groups away from the horn. Like, what muscle groups do I use away from the horn? How do I
exactly.
retrain moving away from the horn in my face?
Yeah.
And also think about the back of the jaw and the neck and my whole body incorporated into
The
it.
jaw, you know, the jaw is crucial. It's crucial for any instrumentalist, but now that you're talking about this, I would think it's super crucial for embouchure dystonia. And you just have to be able to let this all go here. I
Yes.
completely let it go. And imagine that space there, that opening your jaw will allow, and opening that space and letting it hang down. So there's nothing that you have to do intentionally to make the jaw function. You just let it go. Just
Yeah. I was
let it
just telling
go.
someone like, you know, we a lot of brass players don't think about their jaw movement as far as playing because what happens is a lot of us kind of get stuck in this position and then we realize our jaw moves a tiny bit it's like I'm a downstream player so sometimes my jaw will move back a little bit when I go higher and then when I go lower it drops down which is typically normal
Oh,
but it moves by like that much but even just having your jaw like this the whole time it's
yes.
still that is like not a normal position for your jaw on a daily basis. It's your muscles in your face were not meant to be used in this very kind of set position or way of playing. So
I'm quite sure you can find a way to do that position without tightening your jaw. I'm
yeah,
virtually certain of it.
yeah, I'm always constantly working on it and relieving the tension and finding ways and I have a little more time to now work on it now that my life isn't as hectic. So it will be that I could do more, but I've been playing an orchestra in a local orchestra, which has been helping too because I feel like just continually playing and hopping in has helped a lot. I do have a couple of questions that have come in for you, and I'm just going to read them all right now because there's quite a few. And you can address whichever ones uh, you feel like addressing. So I have, let me see here. Oh yeah, I just had, oh, John. Yeah, John. Okay, John is a trumpet player and he has cervical dystonia. And he says that he's taken over 13 years of continuous Alexander technique lessons. He says he does not believe it can cure focal dystonia, though he believes it can be generally very helpful to helping out with the recovery.
That's my
And
experience.
Yeah, I believe so too. I definitely don't think it's a one size fit all way of doing things.
No.
And then Julie Baxis, who is also a trumpet player with cervical dystonia. Hi, Julie. Thank you for joining. She always joins live streams, and I love her. We were friends in Colorado when I lived there. She says, "Hi, David. Thank you so much for providing a ray of hope. I'm a trumpet player with cervical dystonia who's currently retraining and now looking into posture. I was wondering if you can provide more specifics about your retraining process." So maybe we'll get into that in a second because you've been kind of discussing that already. Gary Campbell says, "Hi, Katie. May I ask, as a guitarist recently diagnosed with focal dystonia in my left hand, I wondered if you could ask David what he believes is the best response when practicing and you feel a dystonic response reaction. Should we stop and re-evaluate or keep going, or perhaps some exercise mentally or physically? Thank you so much for your inspiration." Maybe we can stop and answer that one.
Yeah, let's do that. Hi, Gary. I know Gary, Katie, so nice to hear from you. Thanks for joining in. Yeah, basically progress with focal dystonia, curing focal dystonia, occurs over time where you're conquering the dystonic response at every possible moment. So again, if you can find what it is that prevents the dystonic response from happening, you need to reinforce that over and over and over again. So rather than pushing through, better to focus on a very small amount of music, a measure at a time, even a few notes at a time, 2 measures at a time, whatever's bite size in terms of your condition at the moment. And work on that and see if you can hone it down so that you can fix the problems in that particular passage. I know that Gary has a copy of my book, and I know that there is a specific section on left hand in chapter 5 of the book, which is of course pertinent to your issues, Gary. So by using those ideas, you will be able to conquer little bits of a piece at a time, but it has to be very, very, very slowly.
Very good advice. Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you, Gary, for joining as well. I also had David Vining join, who's a very well-known trauma player, actually very, very well known among the brass dystonia community because of his recovery from focal embouchure dystonia. And David says, just because someone has been elevated to the status of master teacher by virtue of their playing does not mean they are good at observing and articulating potential remedies, especially when it comes to dystonia. Unfortunately, these well-intentioned teachers sometimes do more harm than good by issuing boilerplate advice that is inaccurate. At the risk of offending anybody, at least some of Farkas falls into this category. Oh yeah, he's making a comment on my reference to the Philip Farkas book, who as horn players, we really follow his kind of teaching as a Bible. Yeah. So thank you, David, for joining as well. And I agree with you. I really felt like I had to retrain like one note at a time. I had to find a pitch that was stable for me, and then I note bended down into the unstable pitch and tried to grab that note that was unstable. So let's say I have a C that's really shaky, but the D above it is, I can hold it out for like maybe 3 seconds and then it gets shaky. I'll play that D, and then I'll try to note bend really quick down into the C and grab it. And even if I can only grab it for a second and it throws me off, I'll let go, and then I'll keep trying again and holding on to longer, and then let go and hold on to even longer. And it was such a long process because I literally had to learn how to grab each note over a long period of time and practice regaining that muscle memory. Because for me, it was like I got so bad to the point where I couldn't get a sound out of my horn. I go to blow and I had such muscle cramps up here that it would just get stuck, and I couldn't do anything to get it to go again. So
sounds like a good approach. I think, you know, to answer David's comment, which is a very, very wise, well taken comment, that is unquestionably true, what you said, that very often the greatest players are not the best teachers because they don't, they have not necessarily struggled with the how-to of playing. They do what they do totally by instinct. It's funny, I'm actually a kind of a mix of the two because I've always been an intuitive player, physically and musically. So some of what I do on my instrument comes naturally to me, but also teaching has always been important to me. So I simply made it my business to try and figure out, okay, how do I describe what I'm doing quite naturally here? How do I go about and make that clear to somebody else, and especially make it clear in such a way that it doesn't just hand them the information, but it gives them information from which they can blossom and grow from there.
Yeah, it's such a hard line to walk, because, you know, as students, we're really relying on teachers to help get us to learn and grow. And then it's difficult because, you know, we could always accidentally say something that's a little bit, you know, just they take it in the wrong way, or they convert it in their own way, and it's not necessarily the healthiest way. So it is a little dangerous sometimes to think about that as well. So thank you for saying that.
Thank you.
To go back to Julie's question, Julie, again, thank you for joining us. She was asking for you to give a little bit more detail about your retraining. Can you kind of talk about the larger muscle groups? Because I know that in your book you had kind of talked about how, I thought was really interesting was you talked about how the muscles joining at the, I can't ever say the part here in the neck, like right in the middle.
You're talking about the sternoclavicular joint?
Yes.
Right here? Yeah.
Yeah. I don't have one. Yeah, I do have one, but
that we all have them. The sternoclavicular joint is where the sternum, the breastbone, meets the clavicle, the collarbone. So it's sternoclavicular joints. And there are actually two little joints, two little bones that surround that indentation there that we all have. That's where the arm begins. That had nothing to do with my curing focal dystonia, but is a useful piece of information about how the arm works and how it moves. In terms of my own retraining, it's kind of difficult to talk about in such a brief amount of time. That's really why I wrote the book, or at least chapter 5 of the book. But very briefly, what I can say is that most people, when they play their instruments, they tend to use, or I should say overuse, the muscles in the forearm, which are smaller muscles. And there are larger muscles here and even larger muscles here in the armpit and closer to that sternoclavicular joint, and the large muscles of the neck as well. So that whole system is extremely important. And learning how to engage those muscles is at the root of what I did for my right hand, the plucking hand of the instrument. For the left hand of the guitarist, and also same for wind players, pianists. Pianists have both a combination of what I'm doing both with the right hand and the left hand as a guitarist. Again, going into great specifics sort of requires me to kind of go from the beginning and take every bit of the way. But if I could sort of basically summarize it, it's letting go of the attempt to control from the forearm muscles, letting go of that, letting the arm feel a sense of dead weight or floating weight, as opposed to holding it up, which then utilizes those muscles. So once you have a sense of floating weight, a sense of dead weight, then you're basically relinquishing control of the smaller muscles in the forearm. And then you can begin to access the muscles further back, the largest muscles. The muscles also go well into the back. And those muscles in the armpit that I'm talking about are probably the intersection of the teres minor muscles, which are crescent-shaped muscles across the upper back, and the latissimus dorsi muscles, which go up in a V shape up your back. Those are the muscles that you want to use. And you want to basically take this dead weight of an arm and feel that weight approaching the string or the key or whatever it is that you're working with, completely with that sense of dead weight, and transfer that weight from the arm into the string or the key. You're transferring that weight.
I know it's a lot to cover, right?
It's a lot. I'm trying to figure out how to, summarize it in a couple minutes here, and I'm doing the best I can. But
you're doing great, and I completely understand why you wrote a whole book on this, because I mean, it is when somebody does recover and they want to share what they've done, it really does take a whole book to explain everything, because it's not something you can really simply explain just by words. You have to work with the person and show them what you mean.
Yes,
by example,
yes.
and be there in person with them.
That is correct. And that's also why I have a bunch of videos that accompany the book on the website of Oxford Press. The videos are sort of video illustrations of what I'm saying. And most of the videos in the book are in the chapter 5 that is specifically about curing focal dystonia or engaging the larger muscles, because those explanations, as well as I've tried to hone it down in the written explanation, they really need to be accompanied by visual explanations. And as you said, Katie, it's best to really combine that with the in-person work with the other person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I love that you did with your book the kind of 3 things you wrote about it. You showed photos of it, and you did video references to it as well, and that was really ingenious. I love that you did that. That's very smart.
Thank you. Thanks.
And I'm like, wow, I would have never thought of something like that. That's really great. I also love that in your book, and just to reference Julie here, Julie and John, who both have cervical dystonia, meaning in their neck, when they play trumpet, and a lot of brass players with focal embouchure dystonia I've come across have had some level of neck tension. And I love that you wrote about this in your book, and it may apply to you, Julie or John, I'm not sure, but if you do get a chance to read the book, he does have a section where he talks a little bit about the neck. And I love that you were talking about this kind of floating concept about how the head and the neck need to float above the rib cage. And so often we push our head forward and we get in this kind of, slouchy, position.
Yes, the shoulders float above the rib cage. The shoulders float just above the rib cage. The head and the neck, if they are leaning forward even this much, not to mention this much, you're putting a tremendous amount of undue pressure and tension on the neck and the upper back. So that's a very dangerous thing, and it's important to be well aligned in the head and the neck, and have the head sit correctly on the top of the spine and move correctly on the top of the spine. Another general thing, since we're talking about neck issues for the brass players, uh, one general image or idea that I have about all these things is the idea, the concept of falling. Everything in the body is healthiest if you just let it fall, not push it down, but just let it fall. Because when we tend to lift up, we tend to produce a lot of tension, whether it's in the neck or the hand or the arm. So the image of falling can be a very useful beginning point for um, allowing freedom of motion uh, in the body and allowing the larger muscles to take over. I hope that makes some sense.
It really does. And Julie was just commenting. She said this really makes sense to me a lot, because she said her cervical dystonia is triggered when she brings her I think she said her left arm or right arm. I'll have to check again. But she's someone who brings her arm up to play the trumpet. That's when her cervical dystonia is triggered. So it happens when she goes to play. She brings her arm
Oh,
up. And
so the lifting then needs to happen with a feeling of weight, of dead weight. If you're lifting with too much intention in the shoulder and the upper back, you're going to be exerting way too much effort. You simply need to lift almost as if there's something, some weight or something that's on top of your hand or your arm, and that is just pushing down on you, but not forcefully pushing down, just pushing down because it has some sense of weight to it. So as you're lifting your arm, you want to feel that sense of weight falling as you're lifting.
oh, that makes
It's
a lot of sense. Instead of
kind of
feeling
a
like you're
strange
fighting
concept.
against the resistance.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, that's exactly right.
Well, David, thank you so much for sharing all this. I know that we're going over time, but I feel like, whenever I talk to people and interview them, I feel like we could spend days talking about this, because it's just like
Good.
such an in-depth kind of complex and thing to talk about, explain, what we've gone through.
Yes.
And for anyone that is watching the live stream and has missed it after it's posted, just go ahead and add the comments if you want to, and I'll send them to David as well. And
Yeah,
before we
that's
wrap
right.
up here, I did have a couple other questions I wanted to get to if you had some time.
Sure.
So this was someone else wrote to me as well. They said during the 12 years of searching for helpful treatment, did you deal with anyone that told you that it was just all in your head?
Oh,
And
yes.
did this cause a lot of grief or depression?
Um, for about a nanosecond. And I'll tell you why, because I knew, again, with my instinct, that that was not the case. I knew that there probably were contributing psychological factors. There almost always are. But I knew that it had nothing to do with the root of the problem. And that was an intuitive thing with me. And it was I felt that with absolute assurance. So my what I want you and your viewers to know is that if somebody tells you that, you take it with a huge fat grain of salt, because it's probably not true. It probably has very little to do with what causes the injury. What causes the injury, the focal dystonia or whatever it is something that is physical. And it's my belief that focal dystonia is essentially a muscular condition that sometimes becomes a neurological condition or involves the brain. But unlike the performing arts medicine community, I do not believe that it is a neurological condition. I believe it begins as a muscular condition and is therefore not a psychological condition.
I see. And thank you for saying that. It's interesting that you say that. And I think it's really important that you focus on the physical aspect of it, because I tell people all the time, and whether they believe me or not, I feel like whether doctors and neurologists say that we don't know what causes, what triggered it. It could have been, you know, we're going through a really difficult time, or it could have been we were in a car accident and injured ourselves. It could have been, you know, overuse. It could have been multiple things. But the fact is, after we get it, we have it. And so we have to focus on finding ways of physically retraining ourselves to get better. So I feel like, especially I see in a lot of the musician dystonia forums and the online groups, they get really caught up in trying to figure out what causes focal dystonia, because they feel like if they find the cause, they can get rid of it forever. But the thing is, like, it doesn't matter what the cause is, because sometimes you could be like, hey, I scratched my leg today and it's bleeding. I don't know what caused it. I'm not going to get caught up in trying to figure out what caused that bleeding. I'm going to go ahead and try to treat it and treat what's happening right in front of me right now. So I really definitely think the physical aspect of addressing the symptoms is really important, and we don't focus on that enough, I feel like.
It's very important, and I basically agree with you. I think that might be important on some level, at least scientifically, to figure out what causes people's focal dystonia. But even if there are some sort of psychological or emotional factors that help bring on the onset of the condition, what brings it on mostly is a physical something that you're doing incorrectly. In fact, in general, when people talk about overuse syndrome, I call that a misnomer. It's misuse syndrome. It's not overuse. You can, if you're using your muscles correctly, then you can be playing a whole lot and never injure yourself. So there is something about some kind of misuse that causes the condition, and that's what you need to get to the root of. And don't worry about psychological causes.
Thank you for saying that. And David, I also read one of your quotes too not long ago, and you said, and this is a great example of what we're doing here, is you said that more well-known players emerging into the field of discussing this disorder would be very helpful. So this is just a great example of that, of you being here and doing this, because you are so well known and respected as a professional guitar player, as a teacher, as a composer. So I can't thank you enough for doing this, and just for sharing your journey and paving the way for everyone else to be more open to discussing this. And I mean, I know it wasn't easy in the beginning to probably speak out about it and everything, but I can't tell you how many lives you have touched, and how many lives you have changed, and how many people really appreciate just everything that you're doing. There's so many people, I call them in the closet dystonic, you know, that are scared of speaking out and sharing what they're going through. So thank you so much for doing this.
I really appreciate that. I think I must say that I think that to some extent I had some career damage because of this. In fact, there are still people who believe that I still have focal dystonia, which has not been true since 1996, however many years that was, 24 years ago. But what you're saying makes it all worthwhile. And I know that there are lots of people that have been helped, and I'm very happy to help. I consider it my duty, my responsibility to help and offer whatever I know about this condition, because I think it's really important. There's a lot of misinformation out there, and I certainly don't know anywhere near everything there is to know about this condition, but I'm happy to offer what I know, and it's important.
Well, thank you, David, so much. For those of you out there who are watching, just to let you know, someone is asking, the name of his book is Playing with Ease, A Healthy Approach to Guitar Technique, and it's published through Oxford University Press. And I think you published it in 2018, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, it's really great, and you can find it on there on Amazon and purchase it if you want to. And it's so great to read it, and it's really refreshing, especially being a musician who has dystonia, whether brass player, woodwind player, guitar player. It's just really wonderful to see this concept and way of thinking about playing, and it really makes even like me as a brass player to think of things differently and see it from a different perspective. So thank you for that. And I have just a couple people that chimed in, just saying thank you so much. And everything. Oh, somebody shared your book in the comments, a link to it. So thank you, Brian, for doing that for us as well. All right, well, David, I think I should let you go. And thank you for staying an extra long time with me to chat through this. I know that you had a wealth of information to share, and I'm just really happy that it's out there for people to be able to view now. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. Delightful to talk to you, Katie.
All right, David, you have a really wonderful day. And I'll share a link with you to YouTube so you have access to this as well.
Beautiful. Lovely. Thank you. Take care.
All right, thank you, David.
Bye.